Today I am kicking off a new series of videos designed for the newer cruiser. Today's video is going to cover tendering. What is tendering, when does it happen, and what do you need to know about it, and why should you know about it? We're going to cover all of that in today's video, so let's get started. Tendering is what happens when your ship can't dock at a pier. Normally, your cruise ship will dock at a pier, put down a gangplank, and you will just walk off of that straight into port. And it will be easy to walk back on when you're done. But sometimes ports don't have a pier, or you might be anchored off of a private island, or your ship might be too large to make it into port, or there could be any number of reasons, but generally, tendering happens when there is not a dock available. So your cruise ship will anchor, and a small boat of one kind or another will transport people back and forth who wish to go to land. Usually, this small boat that's used for tendering is a lifeboat. But sometimes a third party is hired and they bring their boats and take you back and forth. This can be a good thing because usually a third party has a larger boat and can take more people at one time. But just be aware you might end up in a lifeboat going back and forth to land. I'm going to finish walking you through the process, and then we're going to go over a few reasons you need to know about tendering and a few things to keep in mind when you plan your cruise and when you plan your day in port. You will be directed where to go to get on the tender. You will have to show your SeaPass card leaving the ship. The crew will help you board your tender vessel. You'll find a place to sit down, and when the boat is full or ready to go, you will set sail. It will be a 2-minute to 10-minute process to get over to the shore, and there will be a dock waiting for you. You will disembark your tender, go about your day, and you're going to want to keep an eye on the clock so that you come back and catch the very last tender of the day. And this brings me to a few tips you need to know and a few things you need to plan around when you're booking your cruise and planning your day in port. First of all, not everybody can use a tender. If you are someone who uses a scooter or a wheelchair, or you depend on a walker, you're going to want to do your research ahead of time. Many times, tender vessels can accommodate wheelchairs and scooters and all of those things, and everyone. But there are some instances where if you're in a wheelchair or using a scooter, you will not be able to board the tender vessel. And that means you will not be able to get off ship at all in that particular port. This can be a huge disappointment if it comes up on you suddenly and it's a surprise and you had no idea. So do your research ahead of time. If you are someone with mobility challenges and you use a scooter or a wheelchair or a walker, contact your cruise line. Ask them directly whether or not you're going to be able to tender in that port. On a side note, you can find out ahead of time when you're choosing your cruise and booking. There are ways to look and see if you're going to dock or tender. You will search your itinerary. It should tell you right there when you examine your itinerary day by day. If there's any questions at all, you can call the cruise line before you book and find out about tendering. And if tendering is involved, you can ask the person on the phone right there and then whether or not you can access the tender boat if you're using a scooter, a wheelchair, or a walker. There are a few other things you're going to want to know about the tendering process. First of all, tenders tend to be set aside first thing in the morning for people who have booked excursions. So if your tender becomes available at 8 a.m., you may have visions of being one of the first people to jump on and go straight to shore. But you may be forced to wait while they make room for all the people with booked excursions to go first. This could take anywhere from 15 minutes to a couple of hours. It really depends on what's happening on the ship that day. You might not necessarily be able to be one of the very first people on the way out. There also might be a ticket system in place. This is to ensure people with excursions can get on first and they're not crowded out by people who are anxious to get to shore on their own. This will all be announced and made clear to you while you're on the cruise ship. If you have an excursion booked, whether it's through the ship or it's through a third party, make sure you find out about boarding information, whether or not a ticket is required. But don't leave it till the last minute when you wake up the morning that you're docking. And also keep in mind that tendering can take a while. It's not a matter of everybody just jumping on the tender ship all at the same time and off you go. It can be quite a process. They may be loading people in wheelchairs. There may be people boarding who need a minute to get across that gap. Be prepared to pack your patience. Tendering can be a very quick process, but sometimes it does get bogged down and takes quite a while. Another tip for you, since I just explained how hectic the morning tenders can be, if you're not in a hurry to get to an excursion, if you're just going to explore port on your own, maybe give the tenders an hour or even 2 hours to do their thing before you go down and board for your trip over to land. If you can afford to have a relaxed morning and board a tender a little bit later on in the day, that might work out well for you. Another thing to keep in mind, if you are prone to getting seasick, a tender ride is usually very short, very smooth, shouldn't be a problem, but you never know. You might want to take some non-drowsy seasick medication the night before you get on the tender. If it's a very short ride and you think you can make it, I would advise sitting up on the top deck where there's some fresh air, near the front of the boat where there is less motion. An extremely important tip for you, make sure you understand when the very last tender out of port is. This may be different than the time the ship has announced it's leaving. Do not miss that final tender of the day. Once that last tender is in, they're going to leave and you're going to be left behind. Pay attention to when the last tender is, and if possible, don't wait until the last tender. Come back a little bit before the last tender just to save yourself some anxiety and also to save yourself the hassle of being crushed onto the last tender along with a lot of people. A few final tips for you when you board your tender. Listen to the crew, pay attention to instructions, be very careful, watch your step. Also, choose your seat wisely. If you want to get great pictures of your ship as you leave or as you come back, make sure you sit along the railing. Consider attaching your camera by a wrist strap to your wrist so it doesn't fall off into the water by mistake. And if you're a newer cruiser, the final thing I want you to understand about tendering is that it can be a lot of fun. It is a very exciting and unique opportunity. It's unique, it's fun, it can be exhilarating. Ports that use tenders are very common and they're all over the world. No matter where you're cruising, you're going to want to check and see ahead of time if there might be a tender port involved. There are tender ports in Grand Cayman, Belize City, Cabo San Lucas, Bora Bora, Catalina Island, Kangaroo Island, Bar Harbor. So it's always a possibility that you might be tendering. If this matters to you, make sure you check it out ahead of time. That wraps up today's video. If you are a newer cruiser, let me just say welcome and happy sailing. Thank you so much for stopping by today and enjoy your next cruise. Bye-bye.